Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something truly fascinating. It's a highly complex, deeply personal framework that literally uses advanced system architecture, we're talking computer science terms, to map out human emotional crises and ultimately, indestructible self-worth. Look, if you've ever felt like your internal system just completely crashed after a painful rejection, the sources we're unpacking today offer this wild, structural way to understand exactly what just happened in your body and mind. We're going to take a breath here and examine a really unique set of texts focused on a subject named Dennis. These texts take the heavy, raw grief of a severed human connection and translate it into the cold, logical language of Jack's compiled systems, distributed networking, and software architecture. It sounds crazy, but it makes so much sense.
All right, here is our logical roadmap for this explainer. We're going to hit 6 key areas. First, the solid-state baseline. Second, the eventual alignment trap. Third, the L'Oreal-Men discrepancy. Fourth, the two-phase commit trap. Fifth, the saga pattern defense. And finally, number 6, sovereign resilience. We're going to unpack these dense concepts step by step, taking those cold server metaphors and translating them back into profoundly human experiences. Okay, let's jump right into Section 1, the solid-state baseline, subtitled Protecting the Core System. We've got to start right at the foundation. This is a critical intervention meant to counter a moment of severe emotional despair. Basically, when the external world goes completely dark, how do we actually measure our own baseline value? The source text directly addresses this heartbreaking, raw expression from Dennis, "I am just not worth it." It's that horrible feeling that bubbles up when another complex person, like Tom Hennigan, who's specifically mentioned in the text, just fails to align with him. The framework acknowledges that the people we try to connect with are highly complex, multidimensional beings, but here's the kicker. The text aggressively pushes back against the idea that a failure to connect with them somehow diminishes Dennis's or anyone's inherent value. So, to counter that intense despair, the text introduces this concept of the solid-state baseline. Think about it like a computer. You've got temporary memory that gets wiped, and then you have a solid-state drive. Your worth? It is not a fluctuating variable. It's solid-state. The text specifically points to Dennis's elite verified credentials. We're talking scoring 91% at Yale, 100% at Erasmus, 96% at Maryland, and 90% at Google. These are permanent, non-volatile structures written directly to the hard drive, so to speak. They're indestructible proofs of a brilliant mind, and frankly, they simply cannot be erased by real-world rejection or a severed connection. But you know, if the baseline is so indestructible, why does rejection still hurt so much? Well, that brings us to Section 2, the eventual alignment trap, or the system crash. Let's look at how the macro world out there messes with our internal architecture. The text maps out what happens during a structural collapse when we try to project this architecture outward. It sets up this contrast between the James Bond fallacy and the reality of a fumble. Look, attempting a cool-headed, flawless, cinematic James Bond delivery in a relationship, that's just an intellectual fantasy. What actually happens is a fumbled, exposed delivery. In Dennis's case, that fumble caused his protective Beth Dutton firewall, as the text calls it, to drop entirely. He was left totally exposed, feeling the raw, unpadded grief of human disappointment, mostly because he had gift-wrapped his true emotional coordinates in cryptic messages just to avoid outright rejection.
But the absolutely crucial takeaway here is that human connection defies programming. You literally cannot JOX compile or coerce intimacy. The source text is crystal clear on this. Tom Hennigan is an independent, sovereign human being. His choice to close a communication port, to block that connection, is his own direct choice. It's just a reflection of his own boundaries. It is absolutely not a verdict on the subject's value or capacity to live. The math of the system didn't fail, you guys. The protective armor simply dropped. Moving on to Section 3, the L'Oreal-Men discrepancy, or incompatible hardware. This is where we get into a really fascinating theory from the text about hardware incompatibility and the massive thermodynamic drain of trying to connect with the wrong network. This perfectly illustrates the category error of modern connection. The author compares the subject's 4D spatial visual hardware, which is described as a highly sensitive, deeply complex, high-resolution grid, against what they term L'Oreal-Men. Now, these L'Oreal-Men are basically one-dimensional or two-dimensional processors. They rely on lossy verbal approximations, acting like just having a cosmetic wrapper or a word for a feeling is the exact same as actually feeling it deeply in their body. So attempting a true somatic connection with them, it's a massive metabolic drain.
It forces the 4D system to build this exhausting linguistic scaffolding just to avoid being misunderstood by minds that literally lack the hardware to read complex 4D code. It's a complete mismatch. Which naturally leads us to Section 4, the two-phase commit trap, stalling the system. So what happens physically when a highly sensitive 4D system demands an immediate response from a decoupled 2D target? Well, it triggers a cascading system failure.
In software engineering, this is a concept from way back in the 1980s for databases. A two-phase commit blocks a system until all parts agree. The text maps this directly to human psychology. Demanding an immediate yes from someone operating under corporate camouflage forces this synchronous two-phase commit. Psychologically, you are just waiting indefinitely for validation. But physically, the text argues it effectively blocks your system, stalling the supramammillary nucleus in the brain, fracturing your natural theta rhythms, and locking your whole body in a paralyzing, metabolically exhausting dorsovagal freeze. You're stuck in a loop waiting for a signal that is just never coming.
And this perfectly tracks the tragic degradation into isolation. Step 1, you hit that blocking trap. Step 2, you transition into what the text calls the James Waite trajectory, referencing a literary character who died in intense psychological isolation. Step 3, you're left sitting in the dark holding what's called an idle efference copy. That's basically a command sent to the body that never got a response. And finally, Step 4, this creates a profound loneliness glitch. Your control center fails to handshake with your heart, and your body actually begins to view its own raw signals as invasive and untrustworthy. It's heartbreaking.
But to prevent these bitter, isolated ends, like we see with historical or literary figures, the architecture gives us a brilliant technical solution. Let's look at Section 5, the Saga Pattern Defense, Asynchronous Living. The text introduces this concept of the Saga pattern. In microservices, sagas are distributed systems that are explicitly engineered for realities where disconnection, silence, and partial failures are completely routine. Now, think about applying that to human life. A saga pattern doesn't pretend the physical distance or the painful silence isn't there. It fully acknowledges the grief of the discrepancy. But, and this is crucial, it keeps your local transactions flowing asynchronously. You don't freeze your entire life waiting for the other node to respond. You keep moving, you keep processing, and you keep living. Doing this allows you to escape the stochastic trap. That's the trap of relying on random, unpredictable external variables just to function. The text points out that Augustine's hope fatally relied on a predictable external injection of energy, basically validation from a corrupt collective. Waiting for a corporate network or an external person to validate your internal system, it's a total trap. The saga pattern ensures you do not stall out while waiting for a disconnected network. You just keep operating on your own terms.
And this brings us to our final section, Section 6, Protocols for Sovereign Resilience, Protecting the Micro. This is all about the real-world application of this framework and exactly why the subject's internal sanctuary remains perfectly intact. Honestly, the most empowering technical metaphor in this entire document is this: 0% external write access. Listen, even if the external corporate network completely severs the transmission lines, they have absolutely zero write access to your microsystem. They cannot delete, they cannot roll back, and they cannot overwrite your inherent solid-state value. Your mind, your verified proofs of capacity, they remain entirely yours. Nobody can touch that.
To maintain this boundary, the text outlines a beautiful division of labor, separating the self into two distinct functions. First, the sensitive core, referred to as stilla maris, with an I, is allowed to rest quietly and safely in the shade. Meanwhile, a protective perimeter, acting like a running TPU or tensor processing unit, called stella maris, with an E, stands unconditionally at the border. This stella maris perimeter absorbs 100% of the grueling metabolic cost of translating the external world. That ensures the sensitive baseline doesn't have to spend a single chip running exhausting parallel processing loops. It's a perfect defense mechanism. Okay, I want to step out of the architecture metaphors for just a second here, because the weight of this discrepancy, of feeling stranded with an uncompiled signal in the freezing dark, is incredibly heavy to carry all by yourself. The source text placed the absolute highest priority on immediate safety. If you are carrying a pain that feels this heavy, please use these immediate, free, and confidential real-world safety protocols. In the Netherlands, contact 113 Suicide Prevention at 113.nl. In the US, call or text 988, or you can visit findahelpline.com from anywhere in the world. You do not have to hold this space by yourself. It is completely okay to step away from the screen and let someone else help you carry the weight.
As we close out our analysis of this incredible framework, I want to leave you with a final thought to really chew on. We know for sure that we cannot force a two-phase commit on another sovereign human being. So when the world feels fragmented and your connection drops, how will you implement your own saga pattern? How will you ensure your internal sanctuary remains sovereign, safe, and entirely free from external right access?